that beat going crazy.
Welcome, everyone. So happy to see my fellow Hamptonians joining us for yet another one of our NHAA C-Suite series. I couldn't be more excited to be a part of this series this time as a panelist as we talk to other alum that are in the diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as human resources space. So this is going to be a great, great series. Quick housekeeping things. Below this box is the chat. In the chat is where you can place any questions. Those questions will get transferred over to our moderator, and she'll make sure to ask the panelists. The other thing we'd like you to do is make sure that you like this, like NHA Inc. on YouTube, so that we can continue to have all of our likes and have people be able to connect to us easily. Lastly, I want to say Happy Black History Month. And as a part of Black History Month, one of the things that I've been telling everyone to do is to support Black businesses. And I don't think there's a perfect way for us to do that as Hamptonians, is to also support our Hampton business owners. And so what we are launching with NHAA is what we're calling our Pirate Perks program. So it's an opportunity for Hamptonian business owners to get showcased and for us to be able to support them. If you'd like to be added to the Pirate Perks list as an entrepreneur or a business owner, be sure to click the link that Siani is going to place in the chat below. And without further ado, let's get us started. I want to pass us on to our moderator, Victoria Cotter, who is also a member of the NHAA National Board.
Hey everyone, I am so excited to be here tonight. Thank you, Gena and the National Hampton Alumni Association and series creator Van Crawford for building this platform. It's really allowing us to get to know our alum who are truly letting their lives do the singing. My name is Victoria Cotter. I'm the co-class leader of the 2010 class, QT7. I work at Morgan Stanley, and I'm currently a part of our Living in Color committee, which seeks to build real connections amongst the diverse talent at the firm. But my passion for diversity doesn't stop there. I'm a part of the Culture Creators team, where we amplify stories of diverse change makers and connect them with talented HBCU students. And I'm excited to be your moderator tonight. So let's get to meet our panelists. Gena, let's start with you. Can you tell us where you're working, your major at Hampton, and a little bit about you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Gena. As you just saw, because I met you all just a minute ago. I am currently working as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Omnicom Health Group. I've been in that role since the end of October. My major at Hampton was accounting. I'm a member of Quintessence 3, the class of 1998, and I couldn't be happier to be here. I'm sure we'll talk more about our journeys as we continue on.
Lars, can you share a little bit about your journey with us?
Certainly can, Victoria. Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Certainly glad to be a part of this illustrious group. I'm also part of the class of 1998. Somehow or the other, I always forget my class name other than the year. But I can tell you the year is important because it's been a long time. It's been a long journey. As I said, it certainly is a pleasure for me to be here. I'm the head of HR for Mercedes-Benz USA. I have responsibility for the US as well as Canada. And while we're not selling cars, we're certainly moving parts and distributing to all of our dealers across the U.S. as well as in Canada. I started my journey in HR some time ago. We'll certainly share more about the journey as time goes on. And with that, Victoria, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks. Melonie, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Can you share a little bit about yourself with our crowd today?
Of course. Hi, Hampton fam. So nice to be here. I'm Melonie Parker. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Google, Hampton class of 1988, which is Ogra Phi Ogra. So glad to be here. And I have two children that actually graduated from Hampton, my daughter, Lauren, and my son, Travis. So we support our home by the sea all the way.
Wow, talk about legacy. That is awesome. Tahlisha, can you give us a little background on you?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. It's Tahlisha Williams, and I'm the class of 1996, Onyx 3. I am the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Wunderman Thompson, North America. My major was English Arts while I was at Hampton, and I'm so excited to be a part of this illustrious panel and excited to speak to everyone today about my journey.
Awesome, awesome. So glad to meet each of you. So I'm going to go back to Tahlisha with the first question. How would you define diversity, equity, and inclusion for the people in our crowd today who may not necessarily be tied to the space?
Yeah, so I can definitely start out by saying that just the shaping of diversity, equity, and inclusion has changed so much. And I think that there was an increased sense of urgency if you think about some of the tragic events that happened back in June of 2020 and some of the tragic events that have happened across time. And so when I'm thinking about the work that all of us are doing now, which I call purpose work, equity to me is the connector between the diversity and inclusion. And so I think as you listen to us talk about what DE&I means to us, while we all have different angles, I think the perspectives have a unifying factor, which is it's really about the people and ensuring that we celebrate the differences.
That's powerful. Gena, do you want to add something to that?
No, yeah, I think the key piece, Tahlisha hit it right on the head. I think the only piece that I would add on is, the importance of inclusion as it connects the two, diversity and equity, is that, at the end of the day, it's about diversity to bring in the different types of people, whether it's based on ethnicity or orientation or thought. And then making sure they all have an equal opportunity is important. But the end goal in my mind is around inclusion and making sure that people feel like that they belong and that they can speak up and they can be authentic and they can still get the work done. And I think that's really where it kind of lands for me.
That's so true, so true. So Lars, what drew you to the world of HR, diversity, and inclusion?
Other than wishing I was a finance major and realized very quickly it was really not the path I needed to go down. I think as Gena and Tahlisha, and I'm sure Melonie would agree, it's really about the interaction with people. It's when you look at most major businesses, they either go or don't go based on the strength of that important asset, and that's people. I've always enjoyed interacting with people, bringing out the best of people. I love to see how businesses can shift and pivot very quickly, and a lot of that is not the widgets or the machinery. It's really the individuals that help to grind those gears. So that's really been the most attractive for me, Victoria. I can tell you as we kind of move from generation to generation and we look at the strength and power of this newer generation, it becomes even more exciting to see what businesses will become by way of this new workforce.
Yeah, that's so true. So Lars talked a lot about people, and that kind of pivoted perfectly to Melonie. I know you are the employee engagement lead over at Google. So what drew you to the space that you work in?
Actually, I was a mass media arts major at Hampton. And so my first few roles were in the public relations space. And then, life happens, and I got married, had twins, and after I stayed home for a couple of years. And so when I went back into the workforce, I went into human resources. And I think it's a really good lesson about, what's important to us in different seasons of our life. And so it was an opportunity that was available, and I was able to use the skills that I had, and actually still use the skills that I picked up in communications in the work that I do. But very much like Lars, the impact on people, on process, and being able to make change from the inside out is incredibly important to me, and goes back to how my parents raised me. My parents were, walked with Dr. King in the 60s, and, they were really pivotal to making sure that I understood like my role and my place, not in the moment, but in the movement, which, right now, if you think about racial justice, this is the biggest movement that we'll likely see. And I hope that we see in our lifetime, because we won't have to continue to go through these cycles. And so it's where passion meets purpose and opportunity.
Yeah, I know for my generation, it was super impactful to be a part of all the protests and the uprising that we had this summer. And, you know, being a part of living history, although it was happening for a negative reason, just being able to witness history and not reading about it in textbooks and things.
Or living history, right? I mean, you're actually like, we're all living history and we're all iterating in the moment. We're doing work that will be written about in business schools down the road. And so there's no playbook necessarily for what we're dealing with because it's complex, it's nuanced, and it's beyond, like with complicated issues, you reduce them down to their component parts and you can rebuild, but this is complex. So we have to draw on like what we know, but also things that we are going to have to, you know, figure out what we need, what we're going to sense, and we're going to have to be flexible and ready to pivot.
That's so true. And in identifying our needs and discussing people and the role that people play in DE&I want to talk about two concepts that go hand in hand with that. Allyship and mentorship. Can you guys discuss what these mean to you and the role that they've played in your career? I'll throw it to Tahlisha first.
Absolutely. When I think about allyship, especially right now in this season, I think about people who have access to things that maybe underrepresented groups don't have access to. And so we look at allies as somebody who can be a bridge and a connector to those people to be able to get the exposure and the visibility, sometimes the education and awareness that they might not have otherwise had an opportunity to do. They're also advocates as well. And when I think about mentorship, I think about someone who's stepping up, who is wanting to be invested and committed to the just upward mobility of a person. And I think both of them go hand in hand. But really in this season, mentorship is so important, especially when I think about, again, the underrepresented communities who at this point, there's so much of a unique space to accomplish a lot of things and bring forth some of the talents that may not have been as visible. You know, mentorship is key, but allyship is right there beside it.
Yes, it absolutely is. And we got a really powerful question from Autumn on our Instagram. The question reads, our African American Employee Research Group has had an influx of allies. How do you balance their involvement yet make room for our own safe space? Lars, do you want to take that?
You know, I do. I think, first of all, I think employee resource groups, business resource groups, I think are certainly pivotal. One of the things that's probably been most unfortunate, they haven't really emerged as much as we would like. And I think sometimes that has to do with the way they've been positioned. I do think there's a significant opportunity for those that don't look like those in those employee resource groups to see the benefit, see the intrinsic benefit of having those groups within the environment. I can tell you that our employee resource groups, one of them we've recently said, let's try to break the mold a little bit, and that means we merge all three for the time being to create a more powerful impact across the organization. Let's certainly do so, but of course to ensure that we get that allyship and the advocacy that we're looking for. At the end of the day, that's really what it's about. It's about ensuring that the employees that believe in those employee resource groups, whether they are part of those directly or not, that they get the right level of exposure so they can continue making the right level of impact on the organization.
Yeah. And
oops, sorry.
I was actually going to throw it to you, so that's perfect.
Oh, look at that. I'm so psychic. I was just going to say that I would add on to what Lars just said, is that another opportunity I think that employee resource groups or, any resource groups have is that opportunity to provide the individual with a chance to fellowship with people that are like them and to be able to speak, have that community to be able to speak freely. I think for Autumn's question, the thing I would add on is, even though you have allies within that resource group, I wouldn't hold back from what that resource group's focus is. If it's about the Black employees, to continue that on, because the allies are also there to learn. Let's not forget that factor. As much as they're there to help advocate and push things forward so that voices are heard, they're also there to learn as well, because they don't know the whole experience of whatever group they are a part of. So I think that's important to not code switch within your ERG, so that you're able to keep that realness for whoever is a part of it.
Gena, I think that's so important. At Google, we have like over 35,000 Googlers that participate across 16 employee resource groups, and allies participate in all parts of that group. And this, as we've been working through like the racial justice movement, and we've rolled out a set of racial equity commitments, our allies have been right there with us. But some of the things, Autumn, to answer your question, that we've done with allies, particularly with our Black Googler network, and where we've kind of stood in solidarity with our community, which has really stood in pain and trauma, watching the events, past hurts, current hurts, things like that. We ask our allies to participate, differently. And so we do a call out for how allies can actually show up to support like Black Googlers or the impacted community in whatever event we have, so that people really understand and can respect what those roles are. And it reinforces what Gena said, how we're teaching and equipping people to lend support, but also teaching our Black Googlers how to amplify voice, not code switch, and speak authentically. So I think it can really bridge understanding, provide that person to come alongside if we do it very intentionally.
Intentional. That is such a great word to use. We touched on authenticity and, the emotional attachment that people may have to their ERGs and feeling comfortable and that being a safe space. Looking back to the events that happened over the summer and how corporations jumped to a DE&I response, how do you guys act as a catalyst for change while living through the experiences and balancing your own emotions while providing a solution for your company? Lars, do you want to talk to that point?
I do. I can tell you when the social uprising really took place, one of the first things I said to my head of D&I was, this is the moment. There's never been a more golden moment than right now. And it's not because there hadn't been work before, because there's a ton of work. And I think we all know, particularly someone like myself in Atlanta, Georgia, that the civil rights movement had been going on, that effort had been going on for a long time. But every historical process has an inflection point. And I think it was Melonie that pointed out that it was a huge inflection point. And so when I said to her, this is our moment, I said, now is the time for us to put stakes in the ground. The concrete will never have a better opportunity to find its foundation. And in doing so, we've been talking a lot about yield. How do we look back 6 months, a year, 2 years from now and say, when we started in June of 2020, it's that point that led us to some of the results. Today, I just got done with a meeting where it's sort of doing some design thinking around something called the Benj rule. It's a little like the Rooney rule in the NFL, where every interview slate for an NFL head coach, has to have a Black candidate. We're trying to do the same thing in Mercedes-Benz. I will admit that we're a bit conservative, but it's little things like that that we're trying to put into motion to ensure that we get the right level of yield and ultimately create the impact that we know we should be expecting, particularly in the city we're in, but more importantly, that I know our employees are expecting.
Mm-hmm. Melonie, how do you balance as you are sitting in your role trying to deal with everything that's happening socially, but while making a solution for the issues in DE&I at Google?
It's a great question. I'll tell you that, like, the latter part of the spring, I realized that, this wasn't a series of episodic events, that we were actually in a movement, and that requires showing up differently. And what that meant for me personally is there couldn't be a separation between Melonie as the Black woman, but Melonie as the Black woman who also happens to be the Chief Diversity Officer at Google. And what I recognized is that when I tell my story and when I share my vulnerabilities and I'm very transparent about that, I'm bringing humanity with me. So it's no longer someone who you don't know, and there's dissonance between, the majority folks and who they see on TV or read about in social media, because I'm saying it's about me. And people will say, wow, I don't want Melonie to hurt. I didn't know Melonie felt that way. And so it's, how do I bring my identity and not code switch to the forefront so that I could really bring that humanity into the discussion, and never let us forget that we're not talking about numbers, that we're talking about real people, real lives. But what that did for me personally, where, I did do some code switching where the most vulnerable parts of myself were checked at the door, and then I picked them back up on the way out. But when you bring all of that together, it's more vulnerable and it's a lot more fragile, because that's that part of you that you're bringing with you that could be hurt, that could be misused. But I realized how vital it was, and incredibly proud of just the strides over a short time, that we were able to make. And so we set very public goals to increase our executive Black population by 30% by 2025, and to more than double our Black population by 2025 at the non-executive level. And then we've increased our investment at our sites in Atlanta, DC, Chicago, and we'll grow those sites by 10,000 hires by 2025. So we were able to make really meaningful and substantive and sustainable initiatives that will stick and will mean a lot for our folks in our community.
That's awesome. That growing footprint will definitely be impactful, and you absolutely have to make it personal when you're talking about DE&I. But Tahlisha, I want to go to you. We mentioned authenticity, and we've been hearing that word a lot. It's kind of like a buzzword now, especially on social media. As companies jump to these DE&I responses, how can people who don't work in the space make sure that this is this commitment that corporations are making is a movement and not just a moment?
Yeah, I think the conversations have to continue. I know at my organization, we started out by having safe room conversations, and that was just an opportunity to bring our employee population together to just talk about everything that's going on. But now we've changed the trajectory, and we're moving more towards curative conversations. What can we do to start to provide real solutions, things that are going to be sustainable? And so when I think about that type of work, obviously everyone on this panel, we are a point of convergence with that, but the real sentiment lives with the employees. And so in order to really say that we're committed, invested in that work, we have to amplify and elevate the voices of the employees. And so the authenticity comes from actually involving the people that you're committing to. What I've seen a lot of times in organizations is that there's a top-down approach that's very disconnected to the day-to-day reality of the employees. So again, bringing your leadership in the same conversations with your employees is very important, because everyone has a seat at the table at that point.
Yeah, I think now we're in an era where everybody sees the need to grow the table, right? We were often in a corporate space, we thought of crabs in the barrel. If someone else was sitting at the table, that means there's no room for me. But I think now the idea is shifting, where they're like, let's create a bigger table, let's pull up more seats, let's bring as many people in the rooms to get these diverse perspectives and just hear, and to build our company and make sure we're an inclusive space for everyone who works here. Yeah. So Lars, how do you think that people who don't work in DE&I can make sure that this is a movement and not just a moment?
Victoria, it's a great question. It's one that I often ask myself. And granted, I mean, there's some organic, I should say there's a bit of a natural approach that I have, obviously, because of the color of my skin. But the thing I always ask is the same question I've asked in business from day one. What's the value? What's the business? What is the intrinsic business value? And it's very easy to answer that question. And so I've challenged a number of our executives to start asking themselves the same thing. When you start adding to a room a group of individuals that don't think like you immediately ratchet up the return. Now, certainly there's a tail to that return, but you immediately start ratcheting up what could potentially happen. And I think when we start asking ourselves about the value to our customers, the value to our supply chain, the value, et cetera, I mean, so many different avenues I think you start to really get a different lens on it. And then at the end of the day, when it comes to overall representation, you start to ask yourself, if we were to hit certain targets, or if we were to achieve certain aspirations, really what could our business look like? And for us, again, because we're very conservative, I can tell you it gives me goosebumps to even think what that would be. I sit in an executive team today. We just added our first female in over 15 years. I'm hopeful that won't be the last person this year. I'm the only person of color. I can only imagine, but I'm very hopeful of what it could look like in our executive suite when we add the next person of color, be it Hispanic, be it Black, because the possibilities become endless at that point. So yeah, I really think about value. Value is always a lens that I try to look through. It's also the lingua franca for business. So you tend to get people on board quicker, all under the guise of speaking a language that they understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that, Lars. I think a good piece of this is that for individuals that are not in the space directly, it's going to still be a movement because, like you said, this has kicked off a movement. I think we've all said that. I think what's important for those people that aren't in the areas is that they need to be a part of the pathway forward. You know, moving things to change the culture. Because often people believe diversity, equity, and inclusion is all around bringing in more people, right? And just and recruiting the talent to come in. But you can recruit all the talent you want, but if your culture is no good, then they're not going to want to stay. And if they don't feel like they can be authentic or that they could bring their whole self to work, or they don't see people that look like them, then they're going to be just as much ready to leave as when they first got there. So I think what's important for those people that are not in the DEI space is for them to really be pushing and thinking more about driving that inclusive those inclusive behaviors that are necessary to impact the culture, because that is what really drives the real change, and that's what will keep the movement going.
Gena, I call that lead from your seat. So I think, like, what can everybody on this call do? We can all lead from our seat. We can all amplify our voice. We can, really speak up for colleagues if they're being talked over or marginalized or their ideas being taken. We can give voice. We can lift as we climb, and we can, really lend the privilege that we have to others, support our employee referral program. So I think there's a lot that all of us can do to contribute just from the seats that we all sit in.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that insight. Those are definitely things that each and every one of us can apply. I want to pivot a little bit. We got a great question from the chat on YouTube. It says, studies continue to show that diversity training alone doesn't change the minds that work at a company. What are some of the new tools being utilized in diversity training?
Oh yeah, I'd love to take this, and I'll start it off. I think why I love this is because I'm currently in a role that was just recently created, and there was no diversity, equity, and inclusion before I got there, and I'm coming in and building in a strategy, and I think one of the key things that I've got as part of my strategy is a pillar that's around education and training. But I've made a point of working now with our learning and development team to make it not just about the training that they have to take on demand, or if it's a person leading it, whatever it is going to be. But then after that training, we're now bringing them to a facilitated local session that'll be smaller, where they're able to take the skill sets. Like if we have a training on anti-racism, then we're going to have a set of things that happen the next week where we are able to apply to them. Here are the way this might apply in your particular location. This is how it would work in our agency. What kind of experiences have you had that have worked like this? So that we can really have the open dialogues that need to happen after those trainings. Because I think a lot of times diversity training has kind of been a box to check to say, hey, we did our unconscious bias, we clicked, we got through the quiz, we passed it. But we all know, even me, I skip through the things and get to the quiz to see if I can get past it without having to sit through 45 minutes of a of a training. So what we're trying to do is correlate the two to make it not just about that training, but also about the experiences. And we're planning to utilize people that are in our local ERGs to be the people that drive that forward so that they can share experiences and kind of like what Melonie shared about bringing her whole self to work and letting people know, hey, this impacts me, not just the people, but me. I am the people. We're hoping that that's what's going to drive some of that more indoctrination of whatever the courses are that are moving forward. So I think it's got to be a twofold approach. I think it's the training plus how do you apply it.
A little bit counter to Gena. So I'm not a fan of diversity training. I actually do think it's check the box. I am a fan of capability building and like what are the specific competencies that we need to build, and we need to embed those into the leadership, manager, and employee training that we're doing. Like what's the flagship training, at the companies that we sit in, and how are we embedding that so that every person who works there understands the competencies that it takes. So it's not a standalone, oh, by the way, go do this diversity thing. It's all in bed. And new training, is really about immersive experiences, because the research says that adults learn by doing. And so how do you put people in environments so they can immerse themselves and then learn by doing? And how do you follow that on? So otherwise, like Gena said, it is just you're checking the box and you said, hey, I did it. I'm fixed. I got my, blue star or my completion course, and I can hang up my certificate. But there's no heart, mind, or behavior level change.
Yeah, that's something that we've been pushing for at my company, is to have like a live action microaggression training or anti-racism training, so that it's really experiential and you can see in real time what these things and these concepts actually mean and the scenarios in which they play out. So it's great to hear that you guys are actively seeking to implement these types of things. So Tahlisha, this is also from our YouTube chat. A lot of companies are heavily focused on the D in the DE&I. What obstacles, if any, do you see your organization facing when trying to pivot to the focus on equity, i.e., putting women in higher roles and also getting equal pay?
Yeah, I think the term diversity has pivoted so much. Between 2020 and where we are now, I've seen so many different iterations of what it means. But all in all, diversity should never be divisive. And so when we get to the point where there's a level of separation that's going on, where we're no longer unifying around the principles of what diversity means, I think there is an issue there. And so it has to be a really good balance of the equity and inclusion piece. The inclusion and belonging, like Gena spoke of earlier, is so critical, because you can absolutely have, again, the differences within your organization, but not unifying them and not having the people feel included in these conversations really detracts from the ultimate purpose. And ultimately, it's around reshaping mindsets to drive the culture to where everyone feels represented and everyone feels included. And to me, that's what diversity represents.
Mm-hmm. Lars, you spoke about Mercedes diversifying their board and how you recently just hired a woman into a senior level position or made her part of the board. What challenges do you see the company facing in order to focus more on equity?
Yeah, I think there are two. Number one, and Tahlisha really said it, it's a lot of a mindset. If we can do the things that are not superficial, but the things that are tangible, such as better representation, in hopes that we move to better equity. But until we change the mindset, I don't know that we will get that flow right. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is it has to become a part of the oxygen. Melonie, I think it was provocative, but I think it was also pretty profound that, if we're not changing capabilities, then I don't know that we will ever really move the needle much. I mean, what we're really trying to do is move it so it doesn't ever go back. It's kind of like stretching something, once you stretch it, it never really goes back to its original form. So that's ultimately what I think of those two things. I think it's very much that. And then keep in mind too, we don't necessarily want to change all hearts, but we want to change the hearts of people that can make the biggest impact, that we can look at and say, this, based on the 20%ers, people that really can move, help us move this in the right direction. Those are the ones we really want to change, because there will always be a group of individuals that just don't see this as significant. But I think if we can do that, I think we'll all be quite pleased with some of the efforts. This is tough work. My hat goes off to Melonie, Tahlisha, and Gena every single day, and certainly my head of D&I, because there's so many concepts. You're trying to distill them down to what works for your culture. You're also trying to make sure it's integrated with the rest of your business. And then ultimately too, as I said, you're trying to change mindsets so that you're constantly making that impact. But it's very challenging work. Challenging, yet there is progress being made.
Yeah, the progress is definitely appreciated, and all the work all of you do is paramount and necessary. So Gena, I know you're very passionate about the E. Do you want to add anything to the conversation?
No, I think my colleagues here on this panel have covered it perfectly. There is nothing for me to add, and that's not often, except I'll say not everything that stretches goes back to its place. I'll say that about my hamstrings, because they're always not right. But other than that, you guys hit it.
I meant my glasses. I'm trying to fix them constantly.
Well, I know we have some Hampton students on tonight's session, so I want to pivot a little bit for them. What advice would each of you give them about leveraging their unique perspectives in this climate that we're living through?
Do you want any of
to start?
Yeah, I'll start off. I would just recommend to be yourself. I think that's so important, and it sounds so cliche, but the reality is that your gifts and talents will always make room for you. Sometimes I see people pursuing a path, and it's more of a job projection that they're going after versus, really pulling on some of their unique perspectives and gifts that they have. So absolutely be yourself and find a way to get involved with things. This is such a unique time that we're in. Most of us, not all of us, but most of us are working virtually. And so we are now connecting with people who we might not have otherwise had an opportunity to connect with. So connect in different forums. There are a lot of conferences that are budget neutral and are free. Join those, meet people, and just learn a little bit more about the space that you want to be in. I can assure you, if you take that path, which sometimes seems very uncommon, you'll absolutely find your way.
I love that. Can you share some of those resources that may be beneficial to build leadership skills and D&I skills? And someone also asked whether obtaining a certification was good to have.
Listen, I'll tell you, if you want to obtain a certification, do it. Because anything that you can do to further help you understand and get some level of mastery in this is absolutely awesome. And then in terms of resources, for students, there are some councils that are out here that ask for active community membership as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The reality is that most of us sit within organizations, but there are absolutely opportunities within the community to connect. When you think about some of the nonprofit agencies who are looking for some volunteers and partnerships there. So you do have to get a little bit creative. Again, the path does not always funnel through an industry. Sometimes it funnels in the community where you sit. So again, this is a unique opportunity to get involved and to get connected.
Yeah, I actually am one of I did get my certification. I recently got it. And the reason that I did it was because I felt like I wanted to further showcase that this was where I was leaning into, where I wanted to focus my career, because I did make a career shift from corporate finance into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I did get my diversity and inclusion certificate from Cornell. And I would recommend that if it's something that you feel like you want to, like Tahlisha said, if this is something you feel like you want to get additional learning or certifications, it doesn't hurt. And I think that it also gives you some skill sets that you may not have picked up. And I had actually been working in the field already a little bit. on the side, but not fully entrenched. And it helped give me a little bit more skills that I probably wouldn't have thought of. So I think anything that you can do that relates to further learning will do nothing but help you.
I like that. So we just got another question from Google. It said, from YouTube, sorry. It says, outside of training, when does review and development of policy within an organization happen? It's equally important to ensure structures are established and sustained. So I'm not sure who wants to jump on this.
I can take that. I actually think it's a huge part of the equity work that we do and how we address systemic and structural racism and barriers in the workplace to equity, that we have to examine like the practices and the policies and the procedures. And so how does that look across performance management, across promotion, across all the things that impact people? How do we get to parity? And so it's where data really powers progress. And when you really reverse engineer those things back and look at the actual practices themselves, are they leading to parity or not? So it's very integral in the E is for equity part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll tell you, at Google, the way we look at that is all of the HR practices. And when we look at retention as an example, we're looking to see, is it clustered? Are people leaving Google at the same rate across all groups? And if not, why not? And so we look at, the policies around employee relations, the policies around, what happens, to people across the workplace. And we have a retention team led by Hamptonian Rachel Spivey, who leads a retention and progression team that specifically works with underrepresented Googlers, when they are not having experiences at parity or on par with everybody else. So it's a very key part of the systemic and structural work that we do.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that that's head up by a Hamptonian. I think class of 2009, 2008, shout out to them. A question came in, and I think
for Hampton, she's recognized as 40 under 40 for Hampton in 2020 as well. So she's amazing.
It's so good to hear. So another question came in. This seems like it's directly for Gena. What advice would you give to someone looking to pivot from finance into a human resources type role?
That's a great question. I think for me, the advice I would provide is that if you are passionate about something, everything is possible, right? So I think as I was going through my career, I worked in corporate finance for almost 20 years. And within that time period of being in corporate finance, I never took my finger off of the pulse of people. So I was either very much involved in my company's employee resource groups, especially with the Black resource group. I took leadership roles there. I always went back to Hampton to recruit. I was on all the teams to go for the Black MBA conferences, NABA, which is the National Association of Black Accountants. So I was always connected to the piece that related to people and showcasing my own skills. And so my passion would come out very obviously to people. And I think what happened is some leaders kind of asked me, would you ever be interested in doing this work? And, for me, that was what I wanted to do. And once I kind of got their ears, there was no stopping me after that, right? So I made the shift. And I did take a risk because there was a lot of my mentors that were saying, once you leave finance, it's going to be really hard to get back. And, for some companies, that is a thing, right? So once you leave the gang, it's blood in, blood out. And so for finance where I was, it was like that. And so, that was a big risk for me because I had put in a lot of years in finance, but I knew what I was really passionate about and what got me excited to get up and come to work every day. And so with that, I made the shift by advocating for myself. So I never stopped pushing, even when people were like, well, are you sure? You kind of only have finance. And then I was able to pull on the different experiences I had over the years that was able to showcase the skill set I had that got me into, for my first role was in diversity recruiting. And then from there, I improved and ended up getting promoted to talent development and then made the shift to where I am now. But I think it's important to always showcase what you're passionate about. You can do your day-to-day job, but also think about all of those things that you can get involved with. Like Tahlisha said, nonprofit involvement as well is important. Doing all of those things can give you those skill sets that you need that can get you into the careers that you're looking for.
Ooh, that's such great advice. So as a recent MBA grad myself, I'm kind of navigating the world of seeking employment and internal mobility and all of those type of conversations. Someone in our YouTube chat asked, when climbing the corporate ladder, is it best to try and move up within the same company, or is it better to move around?
If you ladies don't mind, I'll take that. I think it all depends. I think you have to be certainly very deliberate about your career. Once you've identified some skills that you'd like to master, and Tahlisha used such a great word earlier about mastery. Once you've decided upon skills that you want to master, you have to ask yourself, where can those skills be best harvested? And certainly not every company may allow you that. But I think as long as you are looking at it from a skill development standpoint, then that will tend to, that's in my experience, that's tended to provided the best avenue. I know that's how I sort of blazed my trail. There are a few things that I certainly wanted to master. And while working in Home Depot after 10 years and thinking that I'd be there for 20 and 25, like a lot of my leaders and some of my predecessors, I realized that the ceiling had hit, but not hit for me necessarily, just hit for my skills. And I needed to move to an environment that allowed me to continue pursuing the mastery of those skills. So I think as long as you are clear on the skills that you want to master, I don't know that it matters so much company. I will say one of the things we are seeing, since we are talking, it sounds like to a younger audience, we are seeing that moving around is not as taboo as it once was.
Right.
So, being with an organization for 2.5 years, that's not uncommon any longer, and it's quite okay. But don't be the person that moves to the company for the sake of it. Be the person that is looking to master those skills. And I think you would have mastered a piece of the mystery that most just haven't quite figured out just yet.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of that, especially with Netflix's new CMO, Bozoma St. John, who her career is very diverse, right? And she doesn't have a long tenure at any of these companies, but she's very impactful and intentional on the role she wants to take on. But Tahlisha, I think you were going to add something.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to what Lars was saying. It's definitely a personal choice. I spent 15 years at a company and so to speak did hit my ceiling, and so I took a leap of faith when I went to my current employer. And I think I felt rooted in that decision, number one, because I had some transferable skills, and I think that's something that's really important, because a lot of times people begin to prescribe to the job descriptions that they see on the job boards, and sometimes it's almost like finding a unicorn to fulfill these different roles. But one thing that you can do is be really confident about who you are and your unique skills. I can assure you those skills can almost live and breathe in any industry. I mean, we are a reflection of that. We are all working in different industries. A lot of us have backgrounds and degrees that don't even really relate to some of the work that we're doing, which is interesting. But every experience that you have in this progression, in this journey, in this path will absolutely equip you for that ultimate goal of where you're trying to go.
That was well said.
That was great. So in thinking about all your experience and everywhere you travel to on your journey, what advice would each of you give to your younger selves? I'm going to start with Gena because she looks like she's not ready to answer, so I'm putting her in her spot.
Thanks, I think. I think for me, the one thing that I would tell myself, my younger self, and I'm talking younger, like just graduated from Hampton. The thing that I would say is to be open to all the possibilities. I think I came in with a very specific thought process about where things would go. I didn't, I'll share a story. I never wanted to go to the happy hours, right? So my coworkers, they want to go out, they want to hang out. And I was kind of like, I'm not your friends. Like, we're not friends, right? So I don't want to hang out with you. And, I had my own world and I was okay with that. And then as now looking back, I'd say that I lost something in that moment, right? I'm able to learn from that. Like I lost the opportunity to kind of build that camaraderie with people that may help me later in my career, right? You never know who you might be working with again or who you're working with. And it's also, I think, I lost the key tenet of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is kind of getting to know each other, right? And getting to know the story of people that you work with and seeing where you can find that connection to be able to move and drive that culture forward. I wasn't really open to that. So that's why I would say to my younger self to be more open to the possibilities of everything that could happen.
I think a keynote in there too was networking, right? And that's one of the things that, as a business student at Hampton, that they stressed, right? Your network equals your net worth, and just finding the importance in building relationships. So, Melonie, what advice would you give your younger self?
First, I'd say breathe. Like, it's okay. Just exhale. Don't be so tight. And I would say where Gena's happy hours were my cookie exchanges, like at the end of the year. And I was like, I don't want to go to the cookie exchange. I'm not going. But I missed a lot of the networking and the relationship building that's essential. So, because only we get to decide for ourselves, like who's in and who's out of our circle, but broadening that a bit. So I would say breathe, broaden experiences, but also grab, I would have said to myself, grab as many experiences as you can for the breadth that you need, because the further up you go in career, it's your breadth of knowledge, and you lose a little bit of depth, except in certain domains, but the breadth will help you out.
Oh, that's good. Knowing a little bit about a lot of things. That's a great piece of advice. Yeah. So Tahlisha, what about you? What would you tell your younger self just graduating from Hampton? The world is full of possibilities. What are you telling yourself?
Yeah, stay curious, and be courageous. I think a lot of times, again, when you think about, the journey through college, we go in, we declare majors, we're on this track and this path. And a lot of times when we leave college, we take some of that formality with us, but really that path is meant to open you up and expose you to more things. So be curious about things that you don't know about, immerse yourself in circles where you can learn something that you might not otherwise know, and immerse yourself so you can unlearn some things. Maybe there are some things that might be a little bit limiting to you because you've not had broader exposure. So I would say stay curious and make sure that you have a teachable spirit and that you're ready to learn.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. And Lars?
I think there are four things, and it's what's genius about this panel. They've all sort of summed up what I think are really some nuggets. Number one, I firmly believe that reading is the big brother to being well said. I cannot tell you, there was a time in my life where I didn't believe in the power of reading. What I've seen time in and time out, not only does it impact your diction, the way you express yourself, but most importantly, in an age where writing is not as seen as significant, it also affects writing. And so your communication takes a higher level. And so what ends up happening for a person of color, you've immediately become this person that people double take because of, as I said, the reading and the overall power of communication. The second thing I'd say, and Melonie, Tahlisha, and Gena said it, exposure. Boy, it opens doors. I mean, we talk a lot about it's not what you know, it's who you know. That's exposure. I think, that statement gets a bad rap sometimes, but you have to build circles and connections with people you wouldn't otherwise meet, and exposure helps to accomplish that. I also think it's important to have an identity. Have a clear identity for what you want, because when you do that, you hold yourself to a level of accountability that no one else can. I'm enjoying this, not now because I'm a little injured, but I've been riding my Peloton, and it is not about the people that ride in my group or anything else. It's about the identity that I want to create for myself. As a chief HR officer, do I want to be someone that's fit? Do I want to, and I digress for the moment, but I think just creating an identity for yourself, I think is so important. And then lastly, I think you got to get outside of your lane. I took a course about 6 months ago through the University of Helsinki in artificial intelligence. Not because I'll ever do anything in artificial intelligence, but I just wanted to understand some of these concepts that so much of the rest of the world is talking about. And then just recently took an Agile course. And so I think it's important to get outside of your lane, particularly if you believe that there are only a few in those top levels that you aspire to. It's going to take some extra things to catapult some of those individuals. And that is not about competition. You just know that you work hard, you invest in yourself, you want to make it worth your while.
Okay, there are a couple of things that I need to touch on that you mentioned. One, you can't talk about reading and not give us some tangible items to look for post this conversation. So I need a book list. Yeah. And then Gena is an avid Pelotoner as well. And I've recently joined the clan as well. So we're going to have to exchange Peloton names after this. So
you got it.
So what's your book list?
Yeah, so I'll give you two really good ones. The Obstacle is the Way. It's by Ryan Holiday. It's a really good book. Ryan Holiday is a gifted writer from Austin, Texas. So The Obstacle is the Way is one. And then Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Chris Voss happens to be a former FBI negotiator. The book is so good. I mean, you think about negotiating as one-upping the person. It's everything but that. It's about building rapport and having empathy. And I'll tell you, in some of the worlds that we live in, not everyone will accept a thought of yours or an idea, even despite how much time you put into that idea. So your negotiating skills actually starts ratcheting up a bit, or the need for those skills start to ratchet up a bit. And so I found that book to be extremely fascinating. There are a bunch of others that try to keep an active list, but this Ryan Holiday guy is pretty gifted. He's into stoicism. I think that's really good. I'm Money Mins on Peloton. You won't find me doing anything as of late, but as soon as I get over this injury, I'll be back in the saddle.
I'm sure Gena already sent her invite because she's just that competitive.
I did not, but I'll send you an email later to get the proper name.
Plus, she will text me at 7:00 in the morning, like, we're doing a strength class. Are you taking it with us? Melonie and Tahlisha, would you like to share any resources that our members can look into following our conversation?
Yeah, I would recommend the book Cast by Isabel Wilkerson and Vanguard by Martha Jones, just, grounding from a racial equity standpoint with history and wisdom for us all in this in the movement that we're in.
Great suggestions. Tahlisha?
Yeah, and I would just say to keep up with the pace of what's going on in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because things are changing, so quickly and constantly, connect to some of the periodicals and academic journals like the Harvard Business Review and, SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management. There are some scholars there who are doing some benchmarking and research that is staying up to pace with what's going on. So that way you can always stay connected.
Gena, anything to add?
No, Tahlisha stole mine. I was going to say to follow up with some of those different organizations that are behind some certifications, because I think, between SHRM or I have an SPHR, I think any of those organizations always put out some really great articles or conferences or virtual meetings. All of those things are things that you can continue to learn from.
Well, that is a great way to wrap the session. I want to thank you all for your time. There are so many great questions in the chat. I'm volunteering Gena that we're going to have to do an IG Live to answer all of these. Lars, Melonie, Tahlisha, and Gena, thank you for your time. And to all of our attendees, be sure to look out for the information that's coming out about the Pirate Perks program. If you haven't already updated your information with the university, make sure you do that so you can stay connected with us and everything that's going on with the C-suite. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye-bye.